A city stopped in tears. That was what the local newspapers, television channels, and the residents themselves said, unable to ignore what happened that cloudy autumn morning. The sky was covered in a dense grey, as if sensing that something sacred, inexplicable, was about to happen. It was no ordinary day. Since the night before, a strange breeze had swept through the town streets, carrying with it the scent of incense and fresh flowers, even though no one had left them there. In the center of the town, the small parish of Our Lady of the Rosary was preparing for its weekly mass. But that day, everything stopped. The image of the Virgin, a wooden carving brought from Europe in the 19th century, was placed in its usual niche next to the main altar. She was known for her serene face, her soft eyes, and the maternal expression that had brought so much comfort to generations of faithful. But that morning, something changed. The first to notice were the altar boys as they entered to light the candles. One of them let out a stifled cry that attracted the parish priest, who ran toward the image. And there, in front of everyone, for no apparent reason, the Virgin began to cry. It wasn't an optical illusion or a mere condensation of moisture. They were real tears, thick with the shine and weight of human pain. They ran down her wooden cheeks as if springing from a living heart. People began to arrive, drawn by the rumor that spread throughout the city in minutes. There was no need for social media or announcements. The news traveled as if the sky itself had shouted it into the wind. By noon, more than 500 people were already crowded inside and outside the temple, many kneeling, others silent, others weeping incomprehensibly. The atmosphere was dense. The air grew heavier by the minute. There were no cars, no laughter, no music. Only the soft sound of tears falling on the altar and the sobs of those present. Some claimed to hear a faint murmur coming from the image. Others said they felt a chill run down their spines as they saw the Virgin's eyes fixed on them. But no one moved. It was as if time had stopped, as if the entire city had entered a sacred pause. The testimonies were reported by local media. "I've never felt so much fear and so much peace at the same time," said one elderly woman. "It was as if a mother were saying goodbye to her children," said another. Television cameras captured clear images of the phenomenon, and although many tried to explain it as a coincidence, no scientific examination could determine the cause of the tears. There was no moisture, no cracks in the statue, and no traces of tampering. Chemical tests concluded that it was a liquid with a composition similar to human tears. But what no one could have foreseen was what happened hours later. The priest, visibly moved, decided to keep the church open all night so the faithful could pray. Some remained in vigil, while others came and went, leaving flowers, rosaries, and letters. At midnight, a group of young people began to sing the Hail Mary in a whisper, as if afraid of interrupting something divine. And in the midst of that prayer, an explosion was heard in the distance. It was then that the mystery began to take on a darker form. The city lights flickered. The sky seemed to open with a dry crack of thunder, and a sudden warm rain began to fall. Many ran for shelter, but others on their knees felt something was being revealed. Those who were present that night say they never experienced the same thing again. The city, somehow, was never the same after that day, and although the newscasts continued to search for explanations, the simplest people in the town repeated a phrase that became a prayer. She cried, and hours later, something happened. To this day, the mystery remains. Some claim it was a warning, others believe it was an act of mercy. But the truth is that the Virgin's tears stopped an entire city, not only in its routine, but in its soul. And what came next changed everything. What do you think she was trying to tell us with her tears? Tell us in the comments if you've ever witnessed something you can't explain, and leave a message of faith for someone who needs it most. Share this video, like it, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter of this story that has yet to end. The tears of the Virgin Mary have been viewed for centuries as a supernatural phenomenon that moves and baffles both the faithful and skeptics. But for those who delve deeper into the mystery, they are not simply signs of sadness. They are messages, they are answers, they are heavenly warnings. From the earliest Marian apparitions to the present day, those tears have not stopped falling. Why is Mary weeping? What do those drops running down her stone, wooden or bronze face mean? Is it compassion? Is it pain? Or is there something deeper, more prophetic, that many have not wanted to hear? The great mystics and saints have spoken about this. Saint Bridget of Sweden, in her revelations, heard from the Virgin herself that her tears were like swords piercing her soul when the world offended God. Saint Alphonsus Liguori wrote that Mary's tears are the silent language of a mother who sees her children running toward the abyss. For them, tears are not metaphors or abstract symbols. They are real. They are spiritual blood, and every time an image weeps, it is because something has been broken in the spiritual world. At La Salette in 1846, the Virgin was seen weeping incessantly as she spoke of a future filled with chastisement, famine, and war. In Akita, Japan, the wooden statue wept 101 times. Scientists confirmed that the liquid was of human composition. The church remained silent for years, but the visionaries affirmed that those tears were for the sins of the clergy, for the cooling of faith, for the chastisements to come. In each case, the weeping was not an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a chain of warnings, a heavenly sequence connecting tears, prophecy, and judgment. Many believe that Mary's tears represent only maternal sadness, but the mystics teach something deeper. Every tear is a form of intercession. As the world moves away from God, Mary stands in the middle, both a bridge and a wall. She cries to stop what is coming. She cries to ask for mercy. She cries as she did at Calvary when her son was crucified. Every tear is a silent plea to the Father, but when those pleas go unheard, those tears also become a proclamation of justice. This is where the message takes on a more dramatic turn, because not all tears signify only compassion. Some announce death. St. John Bosco, in his prophetic dreams, saw the Virgin Mary weeping while the world was burning. In one of them she said, "The punishments are coming, and my tears will no longer hold back the judgment." That's the part many don't want to accept. Tears are also judgment. They are the last resort before God's silence, a silence that precedes punishment. And how do we know when a Marian tear announces death? Mystical theologians speak of signs, sudden changes in nature, earthquakes, plagues, wars. In several documented cases, images that wept were followed by tragedies, civil wars, tsunamis, social collapses. This isn't superstition. It's about spiritual patterns. Mary weeps in one place and the world ignores. Then something erupts, a tragedy, a loss, a void. It's as if heaven was silently crying out, "I warned you with tears." Each tear then becomes a spiritual code, a call to be interpreted, a lament that doesn't seek media attention, but rather the conversion of hearts. Mary doesn't weep for herself, she weeps for us. She weeps because time is running out. She weeps because the world has traded love for arrogance, adoration for entertainment, repentance for indifference. She, who was the mother of the Savior, is now the mother of those who are lost. And her weeping is not weakness. It is spiritual warfare. It's a sword that pierces history. Some saints say that every time Mary weeps, heaven suspends judgment. But if those tears don't generate a response in hearts, the same heaven that paused will act. Tears are over time. They are warning bells. They are lights in the midst of darkness. And when they go out, what follows is the consequence of a humanity that refused to listen to its mother's cries. When an image of Mary weeps, it's not a spectacle. It's a call. Not to be admired, but but to be responded to, not to be moved, but to be transformed. And if her tears continue to fall today, what is she trying to tell us? What sin has become so grave, so unbearable, that not even her pleas can stop what is coming? Perhaps the most urgent question is not why Mary is crying, but rather, what did you do when you saw her cry? What do you think? Do you believe every tear holds a hidden message from heaven? Leave us your comment and write, "I listen to Mary," if you also feel she is speaking to you at this time. Share this message with 3 people and don't forget to follow our complete series. There are places in the world where the ground seems to tremble even with the echo of a heavenly cry, places marked not by geographical features but by tears shed from heaven. Regions that were visited by the Virgin Mary and where, according to numerous visionaries and prophetic messages, she wept with an intensity that left marks not only in the hearts of witnesses, but also in the history of those lands. From mountains to remote villages, the places the Virgin pointed out with sorrow have over time been the scene of tragedies, wars, natural disasters, or profound spiritual decline. And the question that remains is, why did she weep for these places? In 1846, in a small village in the French Alps called La Salette, Our Lady appeared to 2 shepherd children, Maximin Giraud and Mélanie Calvat. She wept as she spoke. It wasn't a discreet tear, but an open, deep, maternal cry. Seated on a stone, her face hidden in her hands, she confessed to them that her people had abandoned the faith, profaned the Sabbath, and despised the name of God. Her voice trembled as she warned that, without conversion, famine and war would take hold in Europe. And so it was. Decades later, the region was ravaged by conflict, famine, and revolution. She wept for these mountains. And today they lie in ruins, the faithful said years later, when they understood that the message was more than symbolic. In faraway Japan, more than a century later, another sign shocked the Catholic world. Akita, 1973. In a remote religious community, Sister Agnes Sasagawa received a series of messages from the Virgin Mary. The most shocking, a statue of Mary began to weep. Not once, not twice, but 101 times. Scientists analyzed the liquid. They were real, human tears. But even stronger than the physical evidence was the spiritual message. Mary spoke of the sin that had infiltrated even within the church, of the threat of heavenly punishment if the world did not repent. She said that fire will fall from heaven and that entire nations would disappear. Akita, like La Salette, became a geographical point where divine weeping left an indelible mark. A few years later, in Africa, in a region forgotten by the world and devastated by tribal tensions, the Virgin Mary wept again. This time, it was in Kibeho, Rwanda. In 1981, several young students claimed to have seen a woman dressed in white who presented herself as the Mother of the Word. In their visions, Mary depicted terrible scenes, rivers of blood, severed heads, fire, war between brothers, and she wept. She wept heartbreakingly. The visionaries didn't fully understand the meaning until 1994, when one of the most atrocious genocides of the 20th century broke out. More than 800,000 people were killed in less than 100 days. Kibeho was stained with blood, and those who remembered the visions said in low voices, "She had already wept for these lands." The pattern repeats itself. Map after map, the Virgin's tears seem to anticipate the fall, not out of fatalism, but as a warning of love. In Syria, the alleged apparitions at Soufanieh in the 1980s were accompanied by weeping perfumed oil pouring from an image and from the hands of Myrna Nazur, a young Christian woman. There was talk of unity among Christians, of fervent prayer, of purification. Decades later, Syria was consumed by a civil war that devastated ancient cities like Aleppo. She wept for these streets, and today they are ashes. In Latin America, popular accounts have reported tears shed on Marian images in Venezuela, Mexico, and Colombia during times of grave social unrest. Although many of these cases have not been officially recognized, the faithful who witnessed the events link them to calls for repentance and national conversion. The Virgin has not ceased to visit the villages, but her tears fall like silent bells before a storm. Why does Mary weep? Because she loves. Because she sees what is coming and cannot force the world to change, but she can warn. She can weep like a powerless mother before children heading for the abyss. Every place where she has wept is like an open wound on the map of humanity, and each message is not an anticipated punishment, but a last resort of mercy. And there's another disturbing detail. In some places, the Virgin has stopped weeping. Statues that once shed tears are now dry. Faces that were once soft and sorrowful now seem hardened by silence. Could it be that the heavens have grown weary of warning? Could it be that the tears have ceased because the time of warning is ending? The mystics have said that every tear of Mary carries a spiritual weight. St. Alphonsus Liguori, in his work on the sorrows of Mary, affirmed that her tears are not merely a sign of sadness, but an act of intercession. When Mary weeps, she is praying for us. But if those tears are not welcomed, if the world ignores them, then each one becomes a drop of judgment crying out before the divine throne. And this is where the mystery deepens. Some theologians claim that there are tears that announce death, not as a desire for punishment, but as a final sign before the fulfillment of hidden prophecies. Just as at Fatima, the Virgin spoke of the end of nations, of wars, and of hell, so too at La Salette and Akita, tears were linked to visions of destruction. When Mary weeps over a land, that land is marked, not cursed, but urged to conversion. Today, as we look at the world and observe the multiplying conflicts, the internal divisions within the church, the loss of faith, the daily violence, we must ask ourselves, how many more tears are needed before the world wakes up? Comment below, did you know these places where Mary wept? Do you think her tears still speak to us today? What do you think would happen if we truly listened to her call? Leave your thoughts to help others understand that these tears are not just any symbol. They are the silent cry of a mother who still waits. It was a grey afternoon when the image of the Virgin Mary began to weep. The chapel was full of faithful in prayer. But what happened that day would forever mark a community in southern Italy. The tears, at first imperceptible, transformed into visible weeping, as if heaven had begun to speak through Mary's face. It was there that the story of Lucia began, a mother of three who, after seeing with her own eyes the Virgin's wet face, experienced a vision that would change her destiny. Lucia recounted that same night, while she was sleeping, a sweet but firm voice whispered to her, "Prepare your children and leave before dawn. This land will be tested by fire." Upon awakening, dazed but convinced, she gathered her family and traveled to the neighboring city. Hours later, a gas leak caused an explosion that destroyed part of the neighborhood where they lived. The incident was reported locally, but Lucia's premonition never made headlines. However, she never again doubted divine intervention. On the other side of the world, in the Philippines, a small statue of the Virgin Mary began to weep in a rural school. The phenomenon attracted hundreds of curious onlookers, but for a young man named Ernesto, it was a personal warning. He had a recurring dream in which the Virgin Mary showed him a giant wave ravaging his coastal village. Alarmed, he shared his vision with the village priest, who decided to organize a procession of penance and consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Weeks later, when an unexpected typhoon hit the region, Ernesto's village suffered minimal damage, while neighboring towns were devastated. "She prepared us," the priest said through tears. "She protected us because we listened." There are records in Latin America that are also shocking for their prophetic precision. In Colombia, a young man named Andres witnessed the weeping of a Marian image in his neighborhood chapel. During the prayer, he felt a light envelop his body and clearly heard a phrase, "Do not remain here, the time has ended for this land." Moved by a reverent fear, he asked his mother to move them with relatives in another city. A month later, one of the heaviest rains in recent years caused a landslide that buried dozens of homes, including his own. Andres became a catechist and to this day recounts his testimony with tears in his eyes. "She saved me, she spoke, and I obeyed." In the Argentine city of Salta, the image of the Virgin of the Hill wept silently. Many pilgrims reported a dense atmosphere of spiritual grief. An elderly woman named Eugenia shared that she had a dream where the Virgin showed her people running and a dark cloud enveloping everything. When she asked what it was, she heard, "This is the smoke of confusion. The city will be enveloped in deceit and violence." Unsure what to think, Eugenia began to pray and warn her neighbors. 2 months later, a wave of political demonstrations and riots left the city in a state of chaos. Eugenia didn't understand all the details, but acknowledged that she had been warned. Not only great natural disasters were announced by these signs. On several occasions, Mary's weeping preceded profound spiritual crises. In a parish in Mexico, an image of Our Lady of Sorrows shed tears during a youth mass. A girl named Renata said she felt profound sorrow at that moment, and a voice within her saying, "Your soul is in danger." She, who had been far from the faith for years and trapped in destructive relationships, decided to go to confession that same week. "Our Lady wept for me before I fell any deeper. She rescued me with her tears," she testified. The same experience was shared by a Brazilian soldier who was on the verge of suicide. He went to visit a chapel with a Marian image that had wept days before. There, he knelt, without knowing why, and heard in his heart, "It's not the end yet. I am with you." He says he left that place with a new desire to live. Later, he became an evangelizer for others who suffered in silence. Another striking case occurred in Guatemala. A child, blind since birth, stood before a weeping image of the Virgin Mary in a grotto. He began to cry as well and suddenly began to shout, "She is shining! I see light!" Witnesses confirmed that the child began to distinguish shapes and colors days later. The child's mother said, "The Virgin Mary didn't just weep for us, she restored my son's sight as a sign of hope." Some ecclesiastical authorities remain cautious about these accounts, but the witnesses remain unwavering. For them, what they experienced was real, transformative, and providential. One constant is repeated in each story. Those who heeded the message that followed the tears managed to avoid tragedy, whether material or spiritual. Mary's tears were not a symbol of defeat, but a warning of love. A love that does not compel, but rather pleads, that does not accuse, but rather calls for return. And you? Have you ever felt like you were warned by heaven before a dark moment? Tell us your story in the comments. Perhaps your testimony is the sign another soul needs to return to God today. There are moments when the air becomes dense, as if time stops to give way to something the human senses can barely comprehend. In sanctuaries, humble homes, and forgotten corners of the world, phenomena have occurred that defy explanation. Before an image of the Virgin Mary weeps, signs often appear that are not the result of chance, but warnings from heaven. These physical signs, often dismissed by unbelievers, mark the threshold of the supernatural, and those who have witnessed them have never been the same again. One of the most recurrent manifestations before Marian tears is the inexplicable smell of roses. There are no flowers nearby, no perfumes in the air, and yet the air is filled with a heavenly aroma. Witnesses claim that this scent appears minutes or hours before the tears begin to fall. It is a soft, penetrating scent that seems to envelop the heart in a peace that can only come from above. In some cases, even doctors and scientists summoned to investigate the phenomena were unable to find a physical source for this scent. Is it perhaps a sign that the mother is present and preparing to weep? Another pre-weeping evidence is the appearance of oily tears. These are not yet human tears or water, but a thick, perfumed oil slowly flowing from the image's eyes. In Akita, Japan, the Virgin exuded a similar liquid for months before the tears of blood shocked the world. These oily tears have been analyzed in laboratories, and in many cases, no natural explanation was found. Furthermore, in several Marian apparitions, oil has been associated with miraculous healings. Is Mary spiritually anointing the people before pouring out her grief? Changes in the light and brightness of the image also precede crying. Some witnesses report that the statue seemed to glow with an internal light, as if alive. On other occasions, the Virgin's eyes became more glassy, with a contained moisture that anticipated the imminent tear. Others saw the image's face slowly transform, becoming sadder, more intense, as if pain were being incarnated there. These transformations cannot be explained by physics or natural lighting. They arise in subtle but powerful ways, preparing hearts for something divine. In some places the birds quiet down, the wind dies down, and a chest-squeezing silence settles in, as if creation recognizes that something sacred is about to happen. That silence is sometimes interrupted by a strange sound, an imperceptible vibration, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. And then, tears. In Civitavecchia, Italy, before the statue shed blood, several residents noticed an inexplicable warmth emanating from the image. Upon touching it, they felt as if it were pulsing. Some even said they heard an inner voice, a whisper inviting them to prepare. But no one imagined what would happen. It was only after these signs that the Virgin began to weep blood. The same thing is repeated in other parts of the world. First, the signs, and then the weeping that moves souls. There are places where inexplicable movements have been recorded in Marian images. Heads turning slightly, eyes following those present, hands that seem to change position. Although some attempt to explain these phenomena with physical theories, many of the movements were recorded by cameras or multiple witnesses at the same time, ruling out manipulation. These small movements announce a living, active presence that cannot be ignored. We cannot forget the witnesses who say they heard crying before seeing it. A subtle sound, a soft sob, like that of a mother who doesn't want her children to hear her, but can't stop herself from crying. Some children have been the first to perceive it. Why is the woman crying? They ask innocently, before adults notice any visible signs. Could it be that their pure hearts detect what sin prevents us from seeing? And there are those who claim that, just before crying, they have prophetic dreams or inner visions. These are not hallucinations, but deep intuitions, like a certainty in the soul. They feel that something is about to happen. At La Salette, 2 shepherd children said that before seeing the Virgin, they heard a voice in their hearts telling them not to be afraid. Minutes later, she appeared, and she was crying. These signs are not reserved for a privileged few. They have been reported in different cultures, countries, and social conditions. Languages and religions matter. Where there is humility and openness, heaven manifests itself. But it is also true that where mockery, indifference, or sin reign, the signs are ignored until it is too late. Perhaps the purpose of these preliminary manifestations is not only to announce the tears, but to prepare souls to understand her message. Because Mary doesn't cry out of habit. She cries because she sees what we don't want to see. Her tears are not a spectacle, they are prophecy. These signs began to appear, and when no one else believed, the Virgin wept blood. Have you ever smelled an unexplained perfume? A presence that can't be seen but felt? Tell us below if you've ever witnessed something you couldn't explain. Perhaps heaven has already spoken to you and you hadn't noticed. There are warnings that aren't shouted but whispered to the soul. Warnings that don't come in the form of headlines, but rather as tears in the eyes of a silent image. Throughout Marian history, heaven has pointed out, in ways that only the repentant heart can discern, that there are places that must be abandoned. These aren't geographical names, nor coordinates on a map, but spiritual realities that repeat themselves under different faces and cultures. Places clouded by an invisible, thick and dense fog that doesn't dissipate with the sun because it isn't physical. It is darkness of the soul. It is the presence of sin. These places are marked by an absence, the absence of God. They are places where the hearts of men have stopped beating with compassion, where injustice has become normalized, where abortion is the law and lies are the system. Places where children are not taught to pray, where the elderly die alone, where altars are torn down to erect monuments to modern idols. Places where sin is celebrated, where the commandments become mockery, and where evil disguises itself as freedom. According to Marian revelations such as La Salette, Akita and Medjugorje, there comes a time when divine patience, eternal in its mercy but just in its holiness, withdraws its hand. And when this happens, those places become vulnerable to all kinds of judgment, moral, social, natural. These are not arbitrary punishments, but a divine response to the prolonged rejection of his presence. Mary's tears in every apparition have been like drops trying to extinguish a growing fire, but when humanity insists on fanning it, the tears become a sign of farewell. Our Lady has said on several occasions, "Come out of there, because soon not one stone will be left upon another." Although these words may seem harsh, they are not born of hatred, but of desperate love. Like a mother who sees her son walking toward a precipice and cries out with all her heart, "Stop!" The places that must be abandoned are not only physical, but also spiritual. It can be a house where violence reigns, a relationship marked by sin, a community where the truth is persecuted. The call is to leave, not out of fear, but out of obedience. Modern idolatry has turned many spaces into sterile grounds for grace. The cult of money, pleasure, and fame has erected temples in nightclubs, on social media, and even in some institutions once considered sacred. The Virgin weeps for this, because she knows that where there is no room for God, there is no room for true life. Such places become magnets of destruction. They attract disease, violence, and moral and economic collapse. It is no coincidence that in many testimonies, people report visions in which they see these places covered by a dark cloud, surrounded by a disturbing silence. In prophetic times like ours, fleeing is not cowardice, but obedience. In the Old Testament, God called Lot to leave Sodom before the fire fell. In the Gospels, Jesus warned, "When you see the abomination of desolation, flee." The same spirit of urgency hovers over us today. And once again, it is Mary who repeats with tenderness and firmness, "Leave while there is still time." We're not talking about abandoning the world, but rather discerning with spiritual eyes where God's presence is no longer welcome. Places where the gospel is openly rejected, where evil is promoted, where life is trivialized. These places have their days numbered, and this is not because of punishment, but because without God, everything falls apart. How many images of Mary wept in front of schools where ideology contrary to divine creation is taught? How many tears were shed in front of clinics where life is cut short? How many sanctuaries are no longer sanctuaries, having bowed to political correctness and abandoned the truth? Mary doesn't come with lists of cities, but she gives us signs when music no longer elevates the soul, when sacred symbols disappear, when the words of God are replaced by empty speeches. That place has lost its light, and the soul that desires to live must not remain. Over the past few decades, some visionaries have shared very concrete messages. Days will come when those who remain in places of sin will be swept away by confusion, ruin, and abandonment. The goal is not to provoke fear, but to awaken. Just as Noah prepared the ark before the storm, today we are also invited to build spaces of holiness. This begins with abandoning areas of spiritual death, moving if necessary, cutting ties, reorienting our lives. Judgment doesn't always come with earthquakes. It often begins with the loss of meaning, with profound sadness, with the daily chaos that drowns hope. The Virgin weeps for those who don't see this, but she also smiles at those who decide to leave, even if it's difficult, because every soul that moves away from the abyss is a victory for heaven. Comment below. Have you ever felt God asking you to leave a place? What signs did you see? Leave your testimony. It may help many discern the path heaven is marking for us today. In every generation, heaven issues an urgent call. Sometimes it does so in the silence of conscience, other times through visible tears, apparitions, signs in heaven and on earth. The message is clear. Not all will survive what is to come, but some will be preserved, not by human merit, but by faithful response. Who will survive? Scripture and Marian revelations offer us the answer. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will take refuge in the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91:1. That is, he who seeks refuge in God rather than in men. The Virgin Mary's messages throughout the centuries have not only been warnings, but instructions for salvation. At Fatima, she called for penance, prayer, and consecration. At Akita, she warned that fire would come from heaven if the world did not change. At La Salette, she wept for the disobedience of the clergy and the people. And in all of them, she always left a door open. Sincere repentance and fidelity to the gospel can halt, or at least soften, judgment. Jesus himself said, "Be prepared, for you do not know the day or the hour." Matt 25:13. Preparation is not only mental or material, but spiritual. Conversion of heart, abandonment of sin, and return to the first love. In times of spiritual darkness, God raises up what the mystics have called zones of light, places where true faith still shines, where the commandments are lived, where there is worship and charity, and where heaven is free to act. These are not famous geographical locations, but small spiritual refuges, homes, and even individual souls that become torches in the midst of darkness. Mary, as a mother, does not want her children to suffer unnecessarily. Therefore, before every catastrophe, heaven sends warnings. In some very specific cases, these warnings manifested as inner voices or dreams. Simple people, listening to heaven's voice, left a region hours before a disaster struck. One of the most striking testimonies occurred in Central America when a woman heard the inner voice, "Leave here with your family. You cannot sleep in this house tonight." She obeyed. The next morning, a landslide buried the entire area. This kind of protection is no fantasy. It is promised to those who walk in obedience. Psalm 34:7 confirms this. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Fear here is not terror, but reverence, a life of holiness, and the awareness that God is not to be trifled with. The conditions for protection, therefore, are neither bought nor improvised. They are cultivated day by day. The Rosary prayed with faith, the Eucharist lived with reverence, frequent confession, fasting offered in reparation. All of these form a spiritual shield. But the essential thing is the transformation of the heart. A soul that harbors resentment, practices injustice, or lives a double life will not be able to withstand what is coming. The zones of light will only remain lit if they are nourished by the truth. The Catechism of the Church teaches that before Christ's glorious return, a great trial awaits the Church that will shake the faith of many. This shaking will also be a separation, not by religious label, but by lived fidelity. Jesus said that true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, John 4:23. Survival, then, will depend not on titles, but on authenticity. In several approved private revelations, such as those of St. John Bosco, a narrow path is mentioned, guided by the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary. Only those who remain on this path will reach the other side. In one of his visions, the saint saw two columns, one representing Mary, the other Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. When the storm raged, only those tied to these columns were not swept away by the waves. Today, the winds blow strongly. Pandemics, wars, apostasy, natural disasters, everything seems like an echo of prophetic announcements. But this is not a time of paralyzing fear, but rather of urgent preparation. Our Lady has said in multiple apparitions that those who pray the rosary with faith will be under her mantle. She doesn't promise to avoid all suffering, but she assures us that she is present so that nothing separates us from love. Even in the midst of chaos, there are families who, even surrounded by tragedy, were untouched by destruction. Stories of homes preserved in the midst of earthquakes, entire neighborhoods protected by prayer, children who, guided by spiritual intuition, escaped from danger zones just in time. The common denominator in all these stories is the same: living faith, a life of grace, attentive listening to the voice of the Spirit. This is not magic or superstition. It is the spiritual law of the kingdom. Whoever loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. John 14:23. When God dwells in a soul, that soul becomes a refuge. And where there is refuge, there is hope. Therefore, this is not just a wake-up call, but an invitation of love. There is still time to build that zone of inner light. It is still possible to transform our home into a spiritual beacon. We can still decide not to be part of the chaos, but rather part of the faithful remnant that will endure to the end. And you? Are you willing to turn your life into a zone of light so that heaven may recognize you on the day of trial? Write in the comments what living under God's protection means to you, and share this message with those who can still change their destiny. In a forgotten monastery among the snowy hills of northern Europe, where the silence seems older than the stones that surround it, a sealed wooden box was discovered with a hand-carved Marian symbol. This archive, sealed for decades, remained hidden behind an abandoned library in the convent of Santa Margalida, a place that, according to the few available records, had been secretly visited by pilgrims seeking signs from heaven. The box contained ancient pages, some illegible with age, but others as clear as if they had been written yesterday. One of them read, "Today she wept blood. It was not imaginary." The handkerchief still holds it. The sister who found it, an elderly nun who asked not to be named, confessed that she had been instructed not to touch anything in that room. But one night, while praying for a tormented soul who had been confided to her in confession, she heard an inner voice, "Seek among the forgotten." Thus, moving aside a shelf eaten away by humidity, she found the box, and with it, a disturbing story. The image of Mary venerated there had wept blood 3 times during 1947. The convent superiors hid it out of fear, writing in their diaries, "We are not prepared for what this portends." The testimony describes the phenomenon in detail. It wasn't scattered drops, but a thin trail running from the image's left eye to its neck. The liquid was collected by one of the nuns, who preserved it in a small white cloth embroidered with a cross. This handkerchief was kept in the box, along with a note written in shaky handwriting, "Whoever finds this, do not be silent. She wept for an entire nation." The country was not mentioned, but there were references to a great spiritual war that would begin when children no longer knew how to pray. The most disturbing detail appeared at the end of the manuscript, a list of city names that, according to the document, would be struck by divine judgment if the message was not spread. For years, this account remained hidden by decision of the local church authorities, not out of disbelief, but out of fear of a mass panic. However, in 2019, the nun, now retired from the convent, decided to send copies of the documents to a small group of independent theologians. One of them, a specialist in Marian phenomena, published some of the material under a pseudonym. It was then that troubling questions began to arise. Why were Mary's tears so often silenced by those who should most proclaim them? The testimony adds to a series of other similar, equally underreported cases, such as that of an image in Central America that wept in an illegal abortion clinic, only to be removed by local police before photographs were leaked, or that of a small statue that, according to witnesses, emanated the scent of roses minutes before emitting a drop of oil from its eyes in a parish closed to the public due to internal scandals. These occurrences, though scattered, seem to follow a pattern. They appear in places marked by deep spiritual corruption, where the cry for help from heaven seems to have been answered through tears. But the real secret isn't just in the tears themselves. It's in what precedes and follows each one, as if each phenomenon were part of a prophetic map that few dare to fully interpret. Some researchers have begun to draw lines between these apparitions and historical events that occurred shortly thereafter. In at least 4 of the documented cases, natural disasters or social conflicts erupted weeks after the tears. Coincidence or warning? The nun who revealed the file now lives in a retirement home, but before going silent for good, she recorded one last message. It wasn't an accident. She cried for us because we were given the light, and we rejected it. This message was included in an independent documentary that mysteriously was removed from digital platforms less than a week after its release. The production company cited technical reasons, but the editor revealed in an interview that he had received worrying calls. No one has spoken about the matter since. However, those who managed to download the original video have shared it in private circles, and the content is beginning to circulate among prayer communities in different countries. The images of the handkerchief, the diary pages, and the nun's testimony are being studied closely. Some believe it confirms a global warning we have yet to understand. Others believe it is part of a broader network of concealment of the Marian message, the implications of which could radically change the way we view recent world history. After more than 2,000 characters, if you've made it this far, this topic deserves to be shared. Like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. We're just beginning to uncover what many have tried to bury. Help us help more people hear this silent cry from heaven. And now, I want to invite you to comment. Do you think these tears are mere coincidences, or a last attempt from heaven to awaken the world before it's too late? Write below and share your experience if you've ever felt an invisible warning change your life. For decades, the tears of the Virgin Mary have been a whisper from heaven, a silent cry descending upon the earth like a maternal call to conversion. From Akita to Civitavecchia, passing through Naju, Syracuse, and Cochabamba, Marian images wept before the eyes of the faithful and skeptics alike, with tears of water, oil, and even blood. But now, something has changed. Some faithful, especially those closest to the places where these manifestations occurred, have begun to notice a disturbing pause. The weeping has ceased. The images, once active in their silent but eloquent message, have become motionless. The oil no longer flows. The tears no longer appear. Heaven has fallen silent. This phenomenon has aroused deep fears among those who have closely followed Marian manifestations. It is not simply the absence of supernatural events, but the perception of a new divine language: silence. Some visionaries have claimed that in recent years they have stopped receiving messages. Others report that they feel Mary's presence, but that she no longer speaks. "She is there but says nothing," wrote a cloistered nun who had received interior locutions for years. Some priests in Italy, the Philippines, and Colombia have expressed the same impression. the impression that heaven has taken a step back, as if waiting for something. And this something doesn't seem to be hope. In many authentic prophecies, especially in Akita, Japan, recognized by the Vatican itself, Our Lady announced that a time would come when there would no longer be warnings. She said that a punishment greater than the flood would come if humanity didn't repent, and that the time of tears would be replaced by fire. At La Salette, there was also talk of a divine silence that would precede the purification. God will allow the world to fall into darkness without guidance, Our Lady said in 1846. Not because she had given up loving her children, but because they had decided to close their ears. At this point, a chilling question arises. Are we witnessing the final cry? Was the last Marian tear shed a final sign? Biblical history offers us precedents. Before the flood, there were warnings. Before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was an angelic visitation. Before Christ's crucifixion, there were signs in the sky. But when the judgment began, heaven was covered in a thick silence. Jesus himself, as he was led to the slaughter, no longer responded to the judges. This is the language of judgment, not the cry, but the silence. After so many cries, so many messages, so many calls, what remains to be said? What more can Mary communicate to a world that no longer listens? There is a powerful image that has been mentioned by some contemporary mystics, that of a mother who, after weeping tirelessly for her lost son, finally sits in silence with dry eyes and a fallen face, awaiting the inevitable. This silence is not indolence, it is painful resignation. And in Christian prophecy, this silence often precedes the moment when God acts without intermediaries. Since 2020, the world has entered a sequence of apocalyptic events that seem to confirm this transition. Pandemics, wars, mass apostasies, unpredictable natural disasters. What was once announced with tears is now executed with fire. Akita's words resound loudly. The good will die along with the bad. Faithful priests will be persecuted. Churches and altars will be looted. Many cardinals will oppose cardinals and bishops oppose bishops. Aren't we already seeing this? And yet, heaven remains silent. Where are the tears today? Why don't we see public miracles like before? The answer may be hidden at the heart of a silent message. When a mother stops crying, it doesn't mean she's stopped loving. It means the time has come for her child to face the consequences. Silence can be the most powerful judgment. The book of Revelation shows us this clearly. There was silence in heaven for about half an hour, Rev 8:1. And that silence preceded the sound of the trumpets of judgment. Each trumpet poured out a punishment. But before all this, heaven stood still. We are perhaps in that prophetic half hour, a pause before the thunder, an artificial calm that intoxicates the world and lulls the lukewarm. But those who watch, those who listen, those who pray, feel through the Spirit that something is approaching. And that sensation is more present than ever, like an overcast sky guarding a storm. It is no longer a matter of looking at weeping images, but rather of looking at the bleeding heart of the world. Mary's weeping may have ceased, because now it is the world that will begin to weep. In the midst of this prophetic silence, many have begun to return. People who once mocked Marian messages now return with the rosary in their hands. They no longer seek spectacular signs, but mercy. It is as if the silence itself were purifying faith. When Mary is silent, those who truly love her do not abandon her. They remain by her side like John at the foot of the cross, and there, without words, they discover the deepest mystery, that even without visible tears, her love remains. But so does judgment. This silence should not be interpreted as a defeat by heaven. On the contrary, it can be the final act of mercy. It's like when Jesus slept in the boat as the storm raged. The disciples believed he had abandoned them, but it was only a test of faith. Mary remains silent today because she knows that every soul is deciding its eternity. And sometimes, the most effective thing is not a tear, but the absence of it. And you, what do you think this silence means? Have you ever felt like heaven has gone silent on you? Leave your comment and tell us how that silence impacted your life or your faith. It all began with a whisper among some faithful who had been in deep prayer. It wasn't a simple rumor, but a coincidence that repeated itself with alarming frequency. Visions that showed the same number, dreams that revealed a constellation, and spiritual messages that spoke of a not-so-distant date. Amidst Mary's tears in different parts of the world, a sign was woven with invisible threads. They weren't human words, but echoes that seemed to come from heaven, announcing that something is approaching. And this isn't a generic symbol, a spiritual metaphor, but a time frame, a marked day, a turning point. In a small chapel in Central Europe, an image of the Virgin Mary began to emit a faint glow during the early hours of May 13th. There were no visible tears at first, but the air became thick, as if something sacred were about to break or announce itself. Some witnesses reported feeling as if time had stopped. Others heard an inner voice saying, "Prepare yourselves, because the sign will come from heaven and no one will be able to deny it." From that night on, accounts began to emerge from different countries. A luminous cross in the sky visible for seconds, lightning flashing across the cloudless sky, and in some cases, a star that seemed to tremble. A woman in Argentina wrote in her spiritual diary that during her prayer, she saw a calendar floating in the darkness with a date glowing, August 15th. The curious thing, 3 other visionaries unconnected described the same scene. A monk on retreat in Poland, a young man converting in Mexico, and a French nun saw exactly the same image. They all heard something similar. That day will begin the separation between those who listen and those who ignore. It wasn't an immediate end, but a threshold. This kind of convergence rarely occurs without a greater purpose. When heaven repeats a sign, when different languages and cultures receive the same warning, it's not to create fear, it's to awaken. Mary doesn't cry for no reason. If she cries, it's because something is going to break. It won't just be an external event, it will be an internal rupture in the soul of humanity. Love will be tested, faith will be torn, and the eyes that still see the light will clearly see the darkness trying to cover everything. And how to recognize that day? An ancient prophecy, hidden for centuries in the archives of an Italian monastery, spoke of 3 signs: a partial eclipse visible in southern regions, a sequence of mild tremors that would occur on 3 continents during the same week, and complete silence from one of the images of Mary that had wept daily for years. "When she is silent, the heavens will speak with fire," the text read. So scholars began to piece together the pieces. An approximate date, an astronomical movement, a call to global repentance. In many parishes, priests began to organize vigils for that very day, not because they were certain of anything physical, but because spiritually something was aligning with irresistible force. At a Catholic school in Colombia, a sister recorded what she called the voice of dawn. Before dawn on August 15th, she felt an intense presence and heard a phrase within her that brought tears to her eyes. "Today the books are opened. Destiny will be written with your steps." That message, which could go unnoticed, was confirmed months later when the same sister, during another vigil, saw a multitude of people in black and white cloaks praying across a valley. The separation had already begun. Church authorities have not yet officially commented on these coincidences, but faithful around the world are attentive. In Medjugorje, visionaries warned that the great sign is very close, and that some who doubt today will fall to their knees when they see what is approaching. La Salette, Akita, Fatima all speak of a final moment, of an hour when heaven will demand a clear answer. No more lukewarmness, no more indecision, and perhaps that hour is closer than we think. If you're hearing this call now, it's no coincidence. Everything Mary has done, from her first apparitions to the recent phenomena of tears and light, is to warn us that there is a time for everything, and that the time of mercy has a limit, a date, a sign, a destiny. And you? Are you ready to look to heaven and understand what is about to happen? In the next message, we will reveal the exact region that was shown in a recent vision, and what heaven commanded to be said for that place. Do you believe that date is real? Have you ever felt a spiritual warning that changed your life? Tell us below and leave a word of warning or hope for others who haven't yet woken up.